So now I'm going to go ahead and run the program on a small device, the LG Optimus L3. And this layout actually works pretty well on a small device. So 4.2, 0.5, calculate, looks good. Not really much more room to do anything with. But on this device, which is a 7-inch tablet, there's a lot of space here, and we can actually use a two-panel layout here, where both the input activity and output activity are on one screen. So different layouts for different devices, but using fragments makes this a little easier. So let's go ahead and create a new layout. Right-click on Layout, New Layout Resource File. And I'm going to name this Activity Under Main, just like my other activity. So Activity Under Main, this will now be the one for small devices. And this one I'm going to create a qualified layout for large devices. So Activity Main. And I'll start with the root element, doesn't really matter, but linear layout is fine. And then I'm going to go Size, Add Qualified Layout for large sizes. So this new one is going to be for large devices. And let me switch this down a little bit, switch to text view. So this linear layout for portrait is going to be vertically oriented. And what I'm going to do here is just have two frames. So there's going to be frame layout, and the width of the first frame is going to be match parent. And then the height, I'm going to say 0 dp, and then attach a weight to it. So I'm going to make this a singleton tag, and then add weight of 1 for that. And then I'm going to copy this thing and paste in another copy. This is also weight 1 with 0 height and match parent width. So basically, the first frame gets half the screen, and the second frame gets the other half of the screen, and these are stacked vertically. And then I'm going to add an ID to this one. We'll call this input content, and an ID to this one, and we'll call this output content. So here's where I'm going to attach my input fragment, and here's where I'm going to attach my output fragment, and I'm going to attach both of those in my onCreate for main activity. So the first thing I want to do in onCreate is, instead of just attaching the input fragment to the content frame, I only want to do this on small devices, and then on large devices I want to attach both the input fragment and the output fragment to their respective frames. So I need a way of telling whether I'm on a small device or a large device before I execute this code. And here's a simple trick for doing that. There's actually a way of looking at the screen width directly and having an if statement based on this. But I saw the solution online, and I thought it was a pretty cool way of doing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Values folder, right-click, create a new Values resource file, and I'm going to call this config for my configuration settings, and not have any qualifiers on this one. So this is going to be the default. And then my default config matches this default layout. So my default layout is small devices, so my default config is also going to be small devices. And for small devices, I'm going to be in one pane mode. So let's go ahead and create an item, a Boolean item, and the name here is going to be two panel. And this is going to be false by default. So default config, not two panel. And I'm going to copy that. And then I'm going to right click and create another values resource file called config. And this time I'm going to add a size qualifier to it for large. So this is going to be on large devices. And then I'm going to select all and paste. So I'm on large config. And this time 2panel is true. So now I know whether I'm on a small device or a big device by looking at the value of this 2panel resource. Let's see how to do that. So this part here, I want to do regardless of whether I'm on a small device or a large device. And then if get resources dot get boolean r.bool.2panel, then I want to do a 2panel layout. Else, I want to do a 1panel layout. So here's my 1panel layout. And then for the 2panel layout, I'm going to create an input fragment, input, and an output fragment, output, and then I'm going to transaction.replace r.id.output content. Actually, let's do input first. Input content is going to be my input fragment, and transaction.replace r.id.output content is going to be my output fragment, and then I'm going to commit. So on small devices, I just add input fragment to content. On large devices, I have a 2-frame layout, 2-panel layout. I'm adding input to the input panel and output to the output panel. Let's go ahead and take a look at this. So first I'm going to run it on the Optimus, and it should work the same. So that looks the same. And then I'm going to run it on a larger device. And here's my 2-panel layout. So I have my input frame and my output frame. Now you'll notice that I'm getting this weird text here, not a number A, not a number W. And the reason is because in onStart, I'm actually calling onStart before I've called setValues. I haven't called setValues yet because the user hasn't filled out this form and hit calculate. So mvolts and mohms have their default value, which is 0. And when I divide 0 by 0, I get something that's not a number. And then when I multiply by not a number, I get not a number. So both amps and watts are not a number here. So to fix that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give these initial values. So let's make them both 1.0f. And now if I run this, I get 1 amp and 1 watt. Now I could actually have an if statement here and check the values and do something, not show these values or whatever, but this is okay for now. I do have one other problem though. So this is going to go ahead and this will work fine on small devices, 4.2, 0.5, calculate. That all works the same. But when I try to run it over here, I get a crash. And the reason is because in the 1-panel version, I have a content frame. In the 2-panel version, I don't have the content frame anymore. And so in my calculate method down here, this is all good, but here where I'm trying to add the output fragment to the content panel, that's not any good anymore. Just causing an error because this doesn't exist. So what I want to do is add another if statement around this and only add the output fragment to the content panel if I'm in one panel mode. So let's go ahead and put this whole thing inside of an if statement. If not get resources, get boolean, r.bool.2panel. So if I'm not in two panel mode, do all that. And now let's go ahead and try it. So we'll try the Optimus. So we'll go 4.2, 0.5, calculate, still works the same. Back button still works the same. Still works. And now let's go ahead and run this on a larger device. And it's not going to crash now, but it's not actually going to quite work correctly either. So let's see what it does. 110 volts at 10 ohms, calculate. So it didn't crash, but it didn't actually update these values either. And the reason is because I'm calling set values inside of this loop. So I actually need to call set values. Else, if I am in two panel mode, I still need to get this output fragment somehow, and I need to set the values. But I'm not creating the output fragment here. I'm actually creating the output fragment here, right there. So how do I actually get this thing so that I can call set values on it down here? Well, this is a local variable, so I can't actually see it from this method. So the trick is to make this be a property of the class instead. So I'm going to create a new property, and I can make it private because I don't need to see it outside this class. Private output fragment, m output fragment, and then here I'm going to set m output fragment to that, and then add m output fragment to my layout. So this thing is now available here, and here I can call m output fragment dot set values volts ohms. So this is almost what I want, but it's still not going to quite work. Let's see what it does. So we'll go 110, 10, calculate. Still didn't crash, but it still didn't update the text. So why is this? I'm setting volts in ohms. So now the class object knows about the correct values, but this onStart method, that was already called. That was called when I first added my output fragment to the main activity. So it's not getting called again when I set the values. So basically what I want to do here is all of this stuff, I want to call it in two places. I want to call it in onStart, and I also want to call it whenever set values gets called. So rather than repeating all this code in two places, I'm going to pull this into a separate method, and I'm going to call that private void set output. Paste this code in, and then I'm going to call set output from onStart, and I'm also going to call it from set values. So now set output is going to is going to get called both when I create the initial fragment and attach it to the activity, and then also when I click on the calculate button. And this is closer, but there's still one other problem here. So let's go ahead and see how it works. So it's going to work fine here. So 110 and 10, calculate, and it updates with the right value. And if I change this to 220, it updates. And if I change this to 20 ohms, everything's working fine. So what about in my Optimus? That's where we're going to have a problem. Okay, so I'm going to add 110 and 10 and hit calculate, and I get a crash. So why am I getting a crash? Well, let's look at what's happening. In main activity, when I go ahead and hit the calculate button, I'm creating my output fragment, and then I'm calling set values. And set values is calling set output, and set output is trying to find these text edits and set their values. But these text edits don't exist yet. Remember the fragment lifecycle? I haven't actually added this fragment to my activity, so it hasn't actually created the view, so those things don't exist. So when I try to call this thing, I get a crash. The fix here is actually pretty easy though. All I have to do is check to see whether this view actually exists or not. And if it doesn't, then I don't actually want to try to set the text. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to move this to the top, and I'm going to add if view equal null, then return. So basically, the first thing it's going to do before trying to set output or do calculation is it's going to see whether the view exists yet. If it does, it's going to go ahead and do all the normal stuff. If the view doesn't exist yet, it's just going to skip it. But then later, onStart's going to get called, and that will call set output again. This time view will exist, and the values will get updated correctly. So let's go ahead and try that on the Optimus. So 110 volts, 10 ohms, calculate. I think my device actually just locked up. That's bad timing. Yeah, I think I actually hit a bug here. Let's try backing out. Let's try running it again. So 110, 10, calculate. So it worked. Go back. 220, 10, calculate. So this works fine. Now let's try it on the big device. And then 10, calculate, works fine. And let's change this to 20, calculate, still works. So everything's looking good here. Let's do one other thing. So let's go ahead and support landscape orientation as well. So I'm going to right click here, new layout resource file, activity main, and I'm going to add an orientation qualifier for landscape. So portrait is the default, the one we've been using. This will be for landscape on large devices. So large landscape, go to the text view, get rid of that. I'm going to start with my layout for large devices. So this is large portrait. And for large landscape, I'm going to change the orientation to horizontal. And then the width is going to be 0 dp, and the height is going to be match parent. And same thing here. Width is 0 dp, height is match parent. So now I'm going to have the two fragments side by side instead of top to bottom, but that's the only change. Everything else is exactly the same. So let's go ahead and run this on a large device. So in portrait, I get stacked and then change the orientation. In landscape, I get side by side. And it should work exactly the same on both of these. So 4.2, 0.5, calculate, still works. And then on small devices, I have my one panel layout. So it still works the same. Now the back button here, since I'm not calling the line that adds to the back stack, this will actually kick me out of the app, but that's what I want. And the reason is because in output activity, whoopsie, in main activity rather, I'm only calling add to back stack if I'm not in two-panel mode. So that seems to be it for this project. I hope you've enjoyed this introduction to fragments. Next week we'll be seeing a more complicated example, and we'll also see how to create lists and how to define interfaces.